for Q&A, we're going to do it via the chat box. And so if you have questions as the session is going along, just type it into the chat box, and then Joe is going to review them and he'll pose the questions to our speakers as we go along. Um, I would like to introduce right now to you our speakers of the day, Dr. Josephine Voss. And Josephine, you can just put your hand up so we can see you. And then Dr. Anne-Marie Becking. Both live, well, mostly in Amsterdam, where it is currently 6 o'clock in the evening. So while they are both thinking of their dinners, out on our West Coast, Canadians are thinking of their breakfast. And that's why we're having our session at noon today, Toronto time, just to appease, so everybody's awake, basically. So I've been very fortunate to have met both Dr. Voss and Dr. Becking on several occasions while I've been attending the last three European Ed forums. And I feel very privileged and thankful that I've been able to make these contacts with them. Dr. Josephine Voss is a hematologist at the Amsterdam UMC, specialized in Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia and other related disorders. She maintains a strong international network for research of this rare disease and aims to raise the level of care for WM patients by conducting both laboratory research and clinical trials. Her work further encompasses patient-driven research, such as this WM Voice study, and which she coordinated together with Dr. Anne-Marie Becking, who is also with us. So Dr. Becking is a medical doctor and a PhD researcher at Amsterdam UMC, who has been working on the clinical challenges in Waldenstrom's care for the past 3 years. During this time, she worked on the design and international collaboration and implementation and analysis of the WM Voice study. So she's our girl here, even though Dr. Voss is her boss. So Dr. Voss will give us a short introduction on the lead up to the study, after which Dr. Becking will take you through the methods and most important results. After the presentation, so we'll have that opportunity for the Q&A, as I mentioned, through the chat box. And Joe Lewicki is going to be moderating that Q&A, as I said before. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here after you've already put in a long day of work on the other side of the ocean.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for the introduction and also for the opportunity for us to explain the results of the study here. We're very happy to do that because indeed it was a patient-driven study, and we have always aimed to do this as a collaborative team and also to give back the results to the people that are maybe listening today. So I'm also very happy that the WM Foundation of Canada was so active in this study, and I particularly want to thank Pierre Faubert, who did a lot of work to accrue patients, Dr. McDonald, who also was a very strong collaborator, and some people from the IWMF, Paul Kitchen and Ron Turnaway, who also helped. Well, you know, I wanted to start this introduction by maybe telling the story of how such a project comes along, because we always see results of studies and we never hear the story of when did this start, where did we plant the seed, and how did we get to these nice slides that Anne-Marie is going to present in a little bit. So these things always take a very long time. So the first moment I want to that I started thinking about this project was in 2019, when I finished my PhD on Waldenstrom at the Amsterdam University, and I was given a staff position at the Amsterdam UMC, and they asked me to work on Waldenstrom. And Professor Marie-José Kersten, my mentor, has been very important in that. And then I thought, okay, now I have the time, and I have a job where I can start thinking about long-term projects. And I wanted to do a clinical trial in the Netherlands for Waldenstrom. And I was thinking about what the best trial would be, because we are in a position now where there's many drugs coming onto the market, there are many pipelines, there's many different agents being developed, and they're all very different. And then not alone do we have these different agents, but we can combine them in different ways. So I could think of 20 different trials that would make sense, but which would be the best one? And then I wondered, I can think about it as from a doctor perspective, from a biology perspective, from a feasibility perspective. But in the end, we want to do something that helps the patients. And as I always say, if we could have one pill, no side effects, cure forever, everyone wants that, of course. That's the ultimate goal. We all want that, but it's not going to happen anytime soon if we are realistic. So the treatments that we are developing will not be that exactly that one pill without side effects, but we can try to get as close as possible. And which of the which things are important for patients, and how could we, with which trial could we help people most? And that's when I realized there's no real way to answer that question. Every doctor thinks they know what patients are thinking, but we should ask the patients. And then within the Netherlands, within Amsterdam, we started working with somebody from the statistical department who has a technique that Annemarie is going to explain that made it a lot more interesting. Because if you just interview people and ask them what they want, that's always a bit difficult to interpret. But this was a statistical technique to answer those questions that we piloted in the Netherlands, done by the previous PhD, Dr. Karima Amador. She presented those results at the ASH annual conference in 2021, a virtual conference, Corona time, but also at the Waldenström workshop in Madrid. And there we were approached by Glenn Cantor, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a big fan of this technique, and he said, "Oh, you should do this at an international level because it will give you much more data and to see if the signal is the same everywhere." And in the end, we were giving funding by the IWMF to do this at an international level. So Karima's Dutch pilot was published. We were already very proud of that, and we learned a lot from her pilot. And then with the funding, we managed to, together with some other projects, to hire Anne-Marie, and she did a great job at pulling it off, and she will explain to you in a minute. So to make a long story short, in 2019, the day after my PhD, I wanted to answer those questions. And here, many years later, here we are, after having learned a lot and also having seen how strong international collaboration can be between physicians and patients. So with that, I will give the word to Anne-Marie.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. And I'll be discussing what we did in the WM Voice study. I'll be talking you through the methods and the results of the study. And the WM Voice study was patient preferences research on treatment options for Waldenström macroglobulinemia. And it was an international discrete choice experiment, which is a difficult word, but I'll explain to you what it is in a minute. But first, you can see my screen, right? Just checking. Yeah, okay, great. First, a short overview. So WM Voice study was a large survey study, which I'm sure some of you participated in, but maybe some of you didn't. It was on treatment preferences of 1,455 people with WM. So that's quite a large patient group that we managed to reach. And they were from 5 countries. So that was Canada, the USA, the UK, the Netherlands, and Australia. And it was, as you can imagine, very much an international collaborative effort between WM experts, physicians on one hand, and patient representatives on the other hand, without who we couldn't have done it. And it was the first international study on this important topic. So Dr. Vos already shortly mentioned why did we do this study. So unfortunately, WM is currently still an incurable disease. But while it's incurable, there are many different treatment options to control the disease. And these treatment options are only becoming more and more as we do more and more research. And all these different options have different properties. And with properties, you can think of what's their effect, how long do they work, what are their side effects in the short term and in the long term, how are they given, is it an infusion in the hospital or is it pills that you take at home? So those are all examples of different properties of these therapies. On the right, you can see an illustration of the different therapies, but I'm not asking you to read all of them. It's just to illustrate how many different options there are already. While there are a lot of options, we do have limited consensus on what the optimal treatment approach is. amongst physicians. And here it becomes very important what patients find important. So patient preferences are essential in making treatment choices because they can support clinical practice. It can help us make more informed decisions in clinical practice together with our patients. But it can also guide future clinical trials. So if we know what patients find important, we know what we have to focus on in the future with our clinical trials. And it can also set priorities in drug development. And with that, I mean risk-benefit assessments by, for example, the FDA or the EMA, to give them more guidance on what therapy should be focused on. So that's the background of the study. That's why we did this. And the questions we tried to answer with this study, the main question was, what do patients with WM find important in their treatment? So which of these properties do they find important? And the sub-questions were, how important are the different treatment features to patients and how are they willing to trade them against each other? Is this the same for every country and every group or every background of patients? And how do personal factors affect the treatment choices that patients make? So quite some questions we tried to answer. So how did we do this? As I mentioned, we did this with a discrete choice experiment, which is a technique that is done in several steps. And these are the 5 steps that we had to undertake, which is why it took quite a while to perform this study. We started in 2022, so it's been 4 years already. And it was a patient-driven survey study. As I mentioned, it was a collaboration between a lot of people from 5 countries, the 5 countries that I mentioned. So we started off with interviews, and we did interviews with expert hematologists from each of these 5 countries who are specialized in Waldenström. But most importantly, with patient representatives, we asked small patient groups from each of the countries if we could interview them. And in the interviews, we asked them what treatment properties are important to you when you weigh off different treatment options. And from these interviews, we came up with a list. And that's the following list of treatment properties. So we selected 6 different treatment properties that patients in the interviews told us they found important. And these are the 6 properties. So first we had the duration of effect. So how long does a treatment work, which could vary between 2 and 8 years. How is the treatment administered? Is it an infusion in the hospital or are they pills at home? What's the duration of the treatment? So how long do I actually have to receive the treatment, which can be a fixed duration of 6 months or less than 6 months, fixed duration of 2 years, or ongoing treatment, so for an indefinite amount of time until it doesn't work anymore. What are the short-term side effects of the treatment? So is it no or mild side effects? Is it moderate side effects or actually severe that affect my daily living? Or persistent side effects, which could vary from no or mild to moderate. And finally, what are the risks of secondary cancers or other cancers in the bone marrow of this therapy? And this risk could be not increased or increased. So why did we need this list of properties? It was to design our survey because the survey consists of choice sets. So the patients who participated in the survey received 16 choice sets in which they had to choose between 2 hypothetical treatment options. And each of these treatment options each time had different properties. So if you see the choice sample on the right, the question was, if you had to choose between these 2 treatment options, which one would you choose? And in this example, for example, treatment A has a slightly shorter response duration. So treatment B works longer. But on the other hand, treatment A is oral pills at home and treatment B is infusions in the hospital. Treatment A is for a fixed duration, so it's done after 6 months, while treatment B has to be given for an indefinite amount of time. And treatment A has severe side effects in the short term, but treatment B has no side effects in the short term. Treatment A has no persistent side effects, while treatment B has moderate persistent side effects that continue after the treatment is done that affect your daily activities. And treatment A has an increased risk of cancer, while treatment B has not. So you can imagine this is quite a complex choice. And we asked people to actually answer this question 16 times. And each time we varied the properties. So each time different treatment A and B were different. And we also asked patients questions, general questions on their background and their disease and treatment history. And before we actually implemented the survey in our complete cohort, we tested it. We did some pilot testing in a short, small cohort of patients. So after we did that, we implemented the survey, and all patients with Waldenström could participate if they were resident in one of these countries. And the survey was opened between October 24 and February 25. And with the help of the involved patient organizations, we could redirect them to an online anonymous survey, and it was available in English, French, and Dutch. French was for the French-speaking part of Canada. And they could fill out the survey by themselves online. And when we reached the target sample size, we could proceed to the analysis. Well, the question was then, what did we find? Well, first of all, we were very happy to include 1,455 patients in this survey. Was a really impressive amount, which we couldn't have done without the help of the involved patient organizations, including WMFC, because in Canada, we managed to include 219 patients. Regarding their background information, so on the right, you see the background information for the whole group. Slightly more patients were male, which was same in every country, and consistent with the general Waldenström population. And most people were aged between 61 and 80 years. They had a median time since Waldenström diagnosis of 6 years, but there was a wide range there. So there were patients who were recently diagnosed, but also patients who were diagnosed more than a decade ago. Most patients were previously treated, but we also had patients who weren't treated before. And there was a wide range of different treatment regimens that they had received before they filled out the survey. So if we zoom in on the Canadian respondents, which I mentioned were 219, we saw that it was quite resembling of the density of the population of your different regions. We had a lot of patients from Ontario, but also from Quebec. But I think almost all the provinces were quite well represented, apart from the territories in the north. And the language of the survey, we saw that the majority of Canadian patients filled out the survey in English, but there were also 26 in French, which I believe is resembling of the amount of French-speaking Canadians as well. So then we looked into the preferences that patients had based on how they filled out the choice sets. And most importantly, we saw that all 6 of these treatment properties that we selected were actually statistically important to patients when they made their choices. So all of these properties influenced how people made their choices between treatment A and treatment B. But there was a difference in how important they were. So the most important ones were long efficacy. So patients were most likely to choose a treatment option with a treatment that worked the longest, and also short-term side effects, which could range to no to severe, were important to patients as well. This was followed by the persistent side effects, so the side effects that don't go away, and risk of other cancers in the future. And although they were significantly important, least important were how the treatment is administered, so oral versus IV, and how long the treatment takes, the treatment duration. And if we zoom in on Canada again, we see that this is actually very similar to the general group and very similar to the other countries. So in this figure. It's quite a complex figure, but it's actually another way to look at the same data, to look at the patient preferences, and the lines represent how important each of the attributes or each of the properties were. And this is to illustrate that the countries strongly overlap. So each of the colors is for one of the countries, and the Canadian line is the orange one. And we see it strongly corresponds with the other countries, which again shows us how homogeneous the preferences are across the countries. Another way to look at these results is the willingness to trade. So we could also look into how patients trade off these properties against each other. And we saw that to accept a worsening of specific treatment properties, patients expected additional efficacy in return. So for example, if we look at the longest bar in this graph, we see that to accept more severe temporary side effects, so to change from no side effects to severe side effects, patients were willing to do that, but they would require in exchange an additional amount of response duration. So they would require 5.5 years extra response duration. So the treatment would have to work 5.5 years longer for them to accept that worsening in their toxicities. The same, but to a bit less extent, was for temporary toxicities. I'm sorry, I see it says temporary toxicities. Yeah, temporary toxicity to go from moderate to severe toxicities. Sorry, for persistent toxicities and for secondary malignancies. Those are all around 4 years that patients will require. But on the other hand, they were much more likely to accept change in administration mode. So they were much more likely to accept going from oral to intravenous therapy already if that meant that they gained 1 year extra response duration. I hope that makes sense. I'd be happy to answer any questions about this in the Q&A if it's not clear. So as I mentioned, we also wanted to know in what way individual factors influenced how people made their choices, because we could imagine that there was individual variation. And what we saw was that treatment preferences were very homogeneous among patients with Waldenström. So there was only one factor that actually influenced how people made their choices, which was if they were treated with BTK inhibitors before, because patients who were treated with BTK inhibitors before, which is an oral pill, were in the survey actually more likely to choose the oral treatment. But the other factors, individual factors, were, as far as we could find, not of influence on how people make their choices. So age didn't significantly influence treatment choices, sex didn't influence it, treatment status didn't, and all these others didn't as well. So that again shows us how not only across the countries, but also across the different backgrounds, how well unified the voices of the WM patients. At the end of the survey, we had an option to leave an open text option to leave feedback, and we received a lot of different feedback. We noticed that it was quite challenging for people to fill out this survey because it was long and it was, well, there were no easy questions because we asked to choose between 2 treatment options, which is a hard question. But what the most prominent feedback was that people found it very interesting, very new, maybe sometimes confronting, but very helpful to think about treatment options in this way. And I think that's the most important lesson that we learned from this research, is how important it is for patients to take them to these treatment options in a structured way, which will take into clinical practice, definitely. So that brings me to what did we learn? To conclude, we saw that first of all, the WM Voice was the first study to study treatment preferences of international patients with Waldenström disease. And we saw that, like I said, this was a very valuable method for them to consider different treatment options. We identified 6 treatment properties that significantly influenced how they made their choices. And we saw that there was a strong similarity across 5 Western countries and also across the different backgrounds that patients had. We see that patient choices are mainly driven by a long response duration and avoidance of severe side effects. Those are the most important factors to them. And we saw that administration mode and treatment-free interval are less influential to them, to their choices. So how can we use these results? Well, first of all, I think it's very important to use these results in shared decision making by physicians and by patients themselves. And we are thinking of developing like a decision aid, which will look like kind of a checklist, which you can bring to your doctor if you have to undergo a new treatment or if you have to discuss different treatment options. So you can check off all these different treatment properties so you can make a well-informed decision on your therapy. Apart from that, it could guide future drug development and trial design. It can help us in the future design clinical trials, see what endpoints we should focus on. And it can also guide decisions by the regulatory agencies that I mentioned before. I have to thank a lot of people for this, for getting to these data, for helping us in this project. So the coordinating study team at Amsterdam UMC, but also all the international WM physicians who helped us set up the study. And on the other hand, we also, of course, have the patient representatives that helped us develop the survey, participate in the interviews, reach a lot of people to participate in the survey. We'd like to thank IWMF for their funding, and most importantly, all the patients who participated in the interviews and in the survey itself, because we are really happy that we could do this study together with 1,455 patients with WM. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions together with Dr. Vos. And I think we'll proceed to the Q&A session then.
Well, thank you very much for that, for showing us why and the results of why we filled out those surveys because it was not an easy survey. And it was like there was no, as I went through it, every time there was a choice, I went, I don't really like either. But you have to try to pick out the best one of the two choices. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's not a
we
perfect
heard that a
world.
lot. Yeah.
That's
Yes.
exactly why there's still a lot of work to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yes. So now I'd like to ask Joe to lead us forward in the a little Q&A.
Okie doke. At the bottom of your screens, there's a chat button. And at the moment, no one has asked a question which speaks to the clarity of the presentation. But I've got a couple that I was thinking about before. Uh, in terms of secondary primary malignancies, how much this is something that's fairly recent for patients. Do you think this will start to create greater worries for patients in their decision making, or do you think this will be stable, especially considering bendamustine rituximab against a BTK inhibitor?
So your question is if the survey might
The
cause
survey is
more?
showing a certain level of impact of secondary
Yeah.
malignancies. Do you think that will increase as patients become more aware of secondary malignancies? I think it's a fairly unknown topic amongst patients. It's only been recent that we're getting much press about it. I don't mean scientific work, but actually things in the press that become common knowledge. A lot of patients are unaware of the risk of cyclophosphamide, bendamustine,
Yeah.
as a BTK.
Well, I think we become more and more aware of it as well, since we have more and more experience with these therapies as well. And it's also one of the reasons that we try to keep developing new treatment options because chemotherapy has its disadvantages, but I do think it's important to inform patients about the risk, especially in the long term, that these therapies have. Yeah.
Maybe I can add, yeah, what's interesting is this is why we want to develop the checklist, because I think it might be one of the things that's not always discussed beforehand, although I always try to. I do always also tell that the risks of those secondary malignancies are very small. Most of the secondary malignancies are very, well, I would say innocent skin tumors that are not melanoma, but the more indolent skin tumors that are not a major problem. There are some exceptions, but those are still very rare. So it's not a huge risk. Otherwise, we would not be using these drugs. These therapies have the advantage of being fixed duration, which for some people is important. Pills can also have ongoing side effects for a long time. So it's always the way off, and it depends on each person what that way off looks like. I do think it's very important that we do get more research, because the exact risks of the different agents, and also if you repeat different agents, we don't always really know what the risks are. So there's also more data needed there. But yes, we saw a strong signal for that component in our project, and it means that that's something that people at least have to know about when they choose a treatment, if there is a choice, right? So, yeah.
To extend on that, cost as a factor. In Canada, it's a public healthcare system. Generally, bendamustine rituximab is used first because it is equally effective to BTKs, both having a median, 7, 8 years. But it's a much cheaper cost than a BTK inhibitor. Is this unique to Canada? What's it like in the Netherlands? How does cost come into patients' choice?
Well, that's a very interesting question that we have discussed extensively when developing the survey. We are aware that it's a very important factor for some patients, and it differs by country whether out-of-pocket payment plays a role in treatment choices. We don't have a lot of experience with it in the Netherlands because it's organized differently, but we are aware that it is for some of the countries that participated in this study. And it also came up as an important factor for some patients in this interviews that we did for the development of the survey. So we considered including costs in this technique, but the reason we didn't is, well, first of all, because it's so heterogeneous between the countries, how the out-of-pocket payment, what it looks like. So it's really hard if you include it in the survey, how you do it. And second of all, and most importantly, studies have shown that if you include costs in a discrete choice experiment in this kind of technique, it kind of overshadows all of the other attributes. Especially if patients think it's too expensive and they can't pay for it, they will choose the other one, regardless of the other properties of treatment. And it kind of complicates the analysis of the other attributes. So we chose to exclude costs from this study, but that doesn't mean in clinical practice that it's sometimes an issue that should be considered. And I think if we develop a decision aid or something like that, we should be aware that costs might play a role and should also be included on this checklist. Yeah.
Maybe I can add at a general level that this system, I think I was a student in Toronto. I told Gloria, I lived in Toronto for half a year as a med student. And I think the health system in Canada is a bit similar to what we have in the Netherlands. So there is no copay type of construction for patients in the Netherlands, but the insurance companies together with the government decide which drugs are being reimbursed. And indeed, we cannot use BTK inhibitors in the first line, for example, unless the patient is unfit for chemo. And this is also related to costs, I think, also related to although that's starting to get longer now. In the beginning, of course, there wasn't a long experience with BTK inhibitors either. So we also try to think for patients, if you use the BTK inhibitor and you lose effect, then you have the chemo at a really older age. But if you turn it around, you still have the BTK inhibitor for the next line. So there are lots of ways to look at this. But indeed, in the Netherlands, there's also reimbursement issues playing a role. Yeah. Everyone in the room, please ask your questions. Don't hesitate. We are very happy to whatever you think is important to ask. This is your moment, so don't hesitate to ask.
Okay.
For Dr. Becking, would you agree that age is a major consideration in choosing between bendamustine rituximab and a BTK inhibitor, as Dr. Voss suggested?
Well, that's an interesting question because we were expecting to find that based on the study. But based on our data, we can't conclude that. We saw a slight trend for patients who were, I believe, younger than 60, that they found response duration, for example, even more important, but it wasn't significant. So we can't conclude that based on these data. That doesn't mean it can play a role in clinical practice. So I think the individuals should always be taken into consideration in individual treatment choices. And it's something that you could discuss, right, with your physician, or the physician could discuss with you in what way your age plays a role in how you make your decisions. Because we do hear it back from patients also in interviews that they would have made different choices 10 years ago, for example. Based on the data of the study, we can't say it.
We have a question in the chat. In the future, will you make other surveys to check how much time a patient can be on the same treatment before they change therapy? This brings in a question about Whimsical, the second patient-driven study underway. Do you think that Whimsical might be useful down the road for helping patients do a selection, given that they're doing a retrospective, almost a phase 3 study of bendamustine rituximab and BTK inhibitors?
Dr. Vos, would you like to answer?
I'm not sure. So I'm looking at the question in the chat. In the future, will you make other surveys to check out how much time a patient can be on the same treatment before having to change therapy? Well, there's two sides to that, because often patients change therapy either because therapy is not working anymore, and that's not something we find out through surveys, but through, well, clinical trials, or, on average, how long does a certain treatment work? What is interesting is that we are, in the end, I told you the story about how I wanted to design a trial. Well, in the end, the trial I designed is with the bispecific antibody that's going to start, well, in 2 weeks, actually. And that's a type of treatment that you can repeat. There are interesting differences but other reasons for patients to stop treatment is because of side effects. And we see with BTK inhibitors that patients use for a long time, that sometimes they switch from one BTK inhibitor to another, but there can be, permanent side effects in a small group of people that are really have a high impact on quality of life. So that's another reason, of course, to change therapy. And for your whimsical question, I'm not quite sure what you meant for us to answer.
Well, the Whimsical has a fair bit of data showing, I think, about 200 people with bendamustine rituximab, 200 on BTK, and both go out the same median length before needing
Right.
retreatment,
Yeah.
which brings in cost and age and the other factors.
Yeah.
So do you think Whimsical will be useful for this type of study, or is this a one-off deal?
It's interesting. At the same time, we also have, for example, in the Netherlands, we have a national cancer registry where data on all cancer patients are collected at the national level, and where we also can evaluate the duration of certain treatments. So that type of data, I think we can get from different sources. But I think what would be interesting in the end is to see how these patients are doing and what, well, that was the patients driven data are very important, I think, to inform, because the hard things, if someone is still responding or not, you can measure in a hospital with a number. But let's say softer things, how are patients feeling with this treatment? Are they getting their life back? Because we're talking about a disease that you have for the rest of your life, right? So I think that's the type of data that can be very well learned from a project like Whimsical, because it has a direct connection to the patients. So more in-depth evaluation of treatment effects, more than just response or IgM levels, so to say. There's
We
a lot
have
of discussion also in the European consortium. We had that discussion in Athens a month ago about what are the goals of treatment, right? As I said, of course, if we can cure people, then that's what we want to do. But as long as we cannot give cure, that if you're having a chronic disease, then quality of life becomes very important. I think in that area we still have a lot to learn, and there's so many new trials coming now that those factors are being weighed more and more. Yeah.
a couple more questions in the chat. One from Ottawa. Do you have a timeline for your proposed checklist for collaborative decision making?
Give that to you,
That's a
Emily.
good question. That's a good question. I can't promise an exact timeline, but I think we'll manage to do that in the next few months. We already had some interest from IWMF, and I'm sure our colleagues from WMSC are willing to help in this. I think it could really be a collaborative effort again to make this. But we'll make sure to spread it once we've made it through the channels of WMFC and IWMF, and so you'll receive it. Yeah, yeah. I think it shouldn't take too long. I think we have a very clear image of what should be in there. Yeah.
Next question from our moderator. What are you both planning for your next research projects? And do you have any other projects in process right now? And perhaps you could expand on your, Dr. Voss, on your mention of bispecifics in trial in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I can start with that. So in the end, the trial that I designed is with a drug called epcoritamab. It's a bispecific antibody, and a bispecific antibody means, if you can see me, that it's an antibody that has two sides, and this drug connects the T cells, so immune cells in the patient, to a target. And in this case, it's CD20, which is a target found on Waldenström cells. So what this drug does is that it connects your own immune system to the tumor, which is what we want, because we want your immune system to be directed to kill the tumor cells. So bispecific antibodies are really big in oncology and in hematology. They are already on the market for similar diseases like follicular lymphoma and diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. But as always, Waldenström lags behind a little bit. And this is why it took me 5 years to open this trial, because there was a lot of going back and forth with the drug companies and to get the funding together to do this. So one of the things that we learned already from the previous pilot project by Dr. Amador was that a fixed duration is preferred over treatment forever if efficacy is good. So this is one of the arguments I used to convince the company that we do fixed duration 2 years for this drug instead of forever, because I know it will also have side effects. So if you can have a drug-free period where you can be in remission and you have a good quality of life without side effects, without the hospital visits, that's very important. That's what we thought. So it's a phase 1/2 study, because this drug is on the market for other lymphomas, but it has not been used in Waldenström, although there is a similar trial just recently started in Boston. So we will have a little bit of a safety run-in, but we don't expect any strange side effects, but you never know. So we want to be on the safe side. And then we will include a total of 26 patients to get an impression of the efficacy of it. So we're very curious. We're opening, we expect to include the first patient in, beginning of June. So 2 weeks from, even sooner. So this is the project that is very important right now, and also we just applied for funding to do a more at the laboratory level to look at the T cells and how they act in Waldenstrom in the bone marrow, where the tumor cells are interacting with the immune system the most. We're building a model to model this disease and to be able to test how we can combine the bispecific antibodies with other drugs to make them even more efficacious. So as you hear, I can talk about my research for a long time, so I will stop right now and give the word to Dr. Becking.
Yeah, well, I'd like to add also, inspired by the WM Voice study, I think we were really interested by how positive patients were about, like I said, thinking of treatment properties in this way. So what we also discussed if there was a possibility to do like a discrete choice experiment, for example, in other subtypes of Waldenstrom. We are doing a lot of research on cold agglutinin disease as well, which is a very rare subtype of Waldenstrom disease, but with specific symptoms. So we thought maybe it would be interesting to do a smaller discrete choice experiment in a smaller subgroup, for example. But that's still in the speculating phase.
There's a very interesting question in the chat about dosing. Uh, in the United States, especially, they're cutting bendamustine rituximab from 6 treatments down to 4. This question's going the other way. Uh, the, the author writes, for me, bendamustine rituximab has no side effects at all. I would have preferred a higher dose to get a longer response duration. Would patients be interested in higher dose? I think this is a common misconception. If Dr. Voss and Dr. Becking could address that, I think it would be excellent.
Maybe you can answer how patients felt about, because response duration is very important, right? So we can understand based on your study, Anne-Marie, we know that response duration is one of the most important things. So I can understand if you have no side effects that you think, why not give me more so that I can experience this longer. The one thing is that I think it's very nice you had no side effects, and I do also have these patients with Arbenda that fare really well. We were just talking about secondary malignancies, and if we are not sure how safe it is to give more. If you would give people, a higher dose of bendamustine, maybe on the short term you would be okay, but on the long term, the damage to the other cells is also higher. So I would not feel completely comfortable. At the same time, I do know that the initial dose for bendamustine was higher. So the first trials in other lymphomas, so the typical dose is 90 milligrams per square meter, and the dose for a lot of trials for other lymphomas was 120. So we know that a dose that's tolerable, but you do get a lot more infections and other side effects. So 90 milligrams per square meter is sort of like the middle of the road dose that most people do okay on, although it's too much. And I also have patients that I have to bring back to 70 or indeed 4 instead of 6 cycles. So dose escalation is an interesting question, but I think for chemo, I would be worried for the long term, and you would need a lot of patients to wait a long time to see if that would be safe. So I see why you're asking it, but I would not necessarily recommend. Be happy with the no side effects and with the response you have, and we're happy to see that there's many things coming for the future. So.
And how do you folks see the future of Waldenstrom treatment? BTKs were a game changer. Do you think that the bispecifics or CAR T will be game changers as well?
Well,
you're about to defend your PhD, so I think you can answer this, Anne-Marie.
yeah. Well, that's the $1 million question, I think. I think the ideal treatment would be one pill, no side effects, endless response duration. But as long as we don't have that, we'll have to weigh off the different treatment properties that we have. And I think if we look at the property list that we have made in the voice, we would need a treatment that has all these advantages. So we would ideally have a treatment that is oral, fixed duration, no side effects. And right now we have to, weigh off between two most important players, which are the BTK inhibitors, which are oral, which is an advantage and do have side effects, but sometimes those are mild, mostly mild, but they have to be given in the long term. And ergonomasti or chemotherapy that is short duration, but has a lot of side effects and is given in the hospital. So in that sense, the immune cell directed therapies that you mentioned might offer an outcome for these patients if they are proven to be as effective as the other ones with low side effects. But they do have different side effect profiles that we have to investigate more. And also we know that Waldenström is kind of a unique disease. We can compare it with other lymphomas, but it also has unique characteristics. For example, patients with Waldenström can respond in a different way to rituximab, for example. So we do need to try all these new treatment options before we can conclude that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion on things that are coming. So the bispecifics and CAR-T, I think, are very promising. And what I like about them is that it's a very different route, right? So you use a very different alley to target the disease, which is very nice. And we know from bispecifics in other diseases that you can stop them and you stay in a remission. And if this disease comes back, you can use them again because the T cells are revived again and you can just use the same drug again, which would be really nice. But we have to see if this is all going to work for Waldenström. There's also BTK degraders coming and that can be used if you don't respond to BTK inhibitor anymore, also being trialed. And there is, of course, BCL2, venetoclax, and rotoclax, and also combinations of all of those. So I think there is a lot going on that I'm pretty confident that all of these type of drugs can find a place in the treatment of Waldenström. So I am pretty confident that when I retire, there will be a lot more options to show on that first slide, right? So this is, I think, really good news. And that the question is now, and that's what we discuss in the European Consortium too, what are we going to spend our energy on and our trial money on, and which ones do we really want to be the first to reach the market? Yeah.
Thank you very much. We don't have any more questions in the chat. We're just about coming up to the hour. Gloria, how about I give it back to you for the...
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank you both so much for your time today, especially given that it's after a full work day. We truly appreciate what you are both doing to help each of us as we live with our Waldenstroms. This research, the voice research, is rather novel in that it has directly asked, like we Waldenstrom's patients, what is important to us in terms of care and treatment. And so we hope that this study will guide researchers as they plan their next research projects going forward. And we trust that they will directly address our needs. And we all know what that is, as Anne Marie has said a few times, one pill for a fixed duration of time. I wouldn't say no side effects, but tolerable side effects and a very long remission or a cure, even better. So thank you very much for all that you've done for us and are doing for us. And we wish you luck, Anne Marie, on defending your PhD.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Yes.
Gloria, Joe,
Thank you all.
and Daniel for organizing.
And have a very nice day in Canada.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.